In the 2024 presidential debate, Donald Trump didn't just answer a question on immigration, he dropped a line that ignited the internet.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Quickly became a meme, sparking the creation of many TikToks, even musical remixes. Despite the virality and entertainment the comment brought, it's a glimpse into how modern populism harnesses social identity and group psychology to deepen social divides, mobilize his supporters, and drive his movement. Trump's words here, absurd as they are, showcase his uncanny ability to tap into the deeper currents of belonging, resentment, and loyalty that drive his appeal to largely white working-class Americans. In this video, we're diving into the history of populism, how the American 2010s socioeconomic climate set the stage for Trump's populism, the psychology behind Trump's populist appeal, exploring social identity theory, the role of us versus them narratives, and how social media supercharges all these dynamics. Now, for context, both candidates were asked a question about immigration and border security, an important subject for many voters and a subject at the core of Trump's campaigning since 2016. When it came to Trump's turn to speak, the mediator questioned the Republicans' filibustering or delaying and preventing of a vote on the bipartisan border bill. In its simplest form, the bill would increase border protection personnel, as while border encounters have increased by 250% over the past 4 years, the number of Border Patrol personnel has remained relatively consistent. The vote was delayed as harnessing border chaos is a centerpiece of Trump's campaign. So what the heck is happening in Springfield, Ohio? First, of course, they're not stealing and eating pets. The people that Trump was referring to are Haitian immigrants, in which the city has between 10 to 12,000. The city became a recent hotspot due to low cost of living and available work, and also due to the Biden-Harris administration's 2023 CH&V parole program, or the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela program. This program allows people from these countries to, quote, request to come to the U.S. in a safe and orderly way, essentially hoping to create more lawful pathways into the U.S. while decreasing pressure at the border. Haitians make up the largest share of participants in the program, attributable to many factors such as the country's political instability, economic crises, natural disasters, and more recently gang violence, which is perhaps the reason they were targeted by Trump during the debate. In an article by Isaac Chotiner in the New Yorker, he noted that there's something unsettling about fixating on what people eat, and I agree. I remember in elementary school when kids brought non-white snacks and food, and the confused looks that other mostly white students had in reaction to them. It's also such a staple sequence of scenes in Western immigrant movies, the pipeline of the BIPOC kid being teased about their lunch to asking their parents for a PB&J the next morning. Food is at the core of cultural identities for immigrant communities, and as such, it has been historically used to stereotype and alienate them. For example, anti-Chinese sentiments have been around for centuries, where unfamiliar foods are labeled as dirty or un-American. Look no further than COVID and its impact on Chinese American restaurants and the collective trauma they and Asian Americans more broadly experienced during that time. Because the pandemic started with someone ingesting a bat purchased at a wet market in Wuhan, Trump, the media, and millions of people called COVID the China flu.
Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no.
When leaders use culturally distinct elements like food as a point of criticism, they tap into a potent psychological tool for alienating immigrant communities. for the Asian American community during COVID, we saw that through the revenue losses in restaurants, with studies estimating a staggering $7.4 billion loss. It was also evident through the targeting and killing of Asians, which in an analysis by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at the California State University increased by 150%. This fixation on immigrant food as different or other feels regressive, yet Trump has attempted to weaponize it to outgroup BIPOC communities again on a national stage. What we observed with anti-Asian sentiment during COVID was a systematic outgrouping of Asians, fueled by fear and inflammatory rhetoric like the China virus, leading Asian communities to be unfairly scapegoated as the source of the pandemic. People knew that these sentiments were unjust before, but with a supposed justification, they now felt emboldened to express and act on their prejudice without reservation. This comment by Trump is the most recent and outwardly bizarre case in a long list of racist, anti-immigration, white nationalist rhetoric that has been at the foundation of his political career, tapping into both the anxieties and the misunderstandings that can arise in communities experiencing rapid demographic shifts. This pattern of misrepresenting complex issues like immigration stir up fear and division to mobilize a sense of nationalist defensiveness. This comment doesn't exist in isolation, though. It follows a long-standing tradition of using fear-based rhetoric to alienate immigrant groups and reinforce a sense of in-group identity among his largely white working-class base. These tactics aren't new. They echo a long history of populist strategies that seek to unify the common people by positioning them as uniquely threatened by outsiders. So, what is populism? Well, it's a political movement that champions or claims to champion the common person, usually through favorable comparisons with a real or perceived elite or establishment. Trump's presidential campaign, however, takes a slightly different approach, actively championing the white working class demographic that constitutes America's majority by denouncing minority populations. His campaign launched with rhetoric likening the Latinx population to drug dealers, criminals, and rapists, with, quote, some he assumes being good people. After this speech in interviews, he doubled down on his xenophobic sentiments, further stereotyping Middle Easterners, associating them with terrorism. Traditionally, populism stood in support of marginalized groups against the elites, but Trump's politics inverts this principle, framing the majority as victims allegedly under siege from immigrants and minorities. This marks a shift from democratic populism to a more authoritarian form. So, to understand the origins of this shift, let's go back where it all started: Southern American farmers in the 1800s. During the 1800s in the US, agriculture was the backbone of the economy. The nation expanded westward due to the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and a victory in the War of 1812, which temporarily severed trade between the US and the UK, pushing the states toward self-sufficiency. This shift led the U.S. to agricultural innovations and improvement in transportation, shifting farming from subsistence to commercial, or farming for self-sufficiency versus for a profit. Between 1860 to 1910, the number of farmers grew from 10 to 31 million, and the value of farms rose from 8 billion to 30 billion. In the South, agriculture centered on large-scale plantations producing cash crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar, which were in high demand in Europe. By this period, southern plantations produced 2/3 of the world's cotton, but relied heavily on slave labor. Conversely, the North was developing a commercial and manufacturing economy. By 1860, it generated 90% of the US's manufacturing output, including textiles, cotton, leather goods, and firearms, all the while employing less people than the South. Southern agriculture remained labor-intensive, while the North's increasingly mechanized economy gave it a strategic edge. This is especially important to the Civil War, as these industrial advantages allowed the North to sustain a war economy, contributing to its victory over the South. Following the abolition of slavery, Southern agriculture underwent a dramatic shift, with sharecropping and tenant farming becoming widespread practices. Sharecropping is a legal practice where a landowner allows a tenant to farm the land in return for a portion of the crops. Tenant farming is similar, with the major difference being that they often own equipment, product, or cattle to a system, whereas sharecroppers have nothing. In this system, sharecroppers would provide between 1/3 and 1/2 of their product to the landowner as payment, whereas tenant farmers, depending on their agreements with the landowner, could also be required to pay with a mix of cash, crops, or labor. However, the South's struggling economy at this time left many farmers without enough cash to purchase necessary supplies and even food, leading to the rise of the crop lien system. Through this system, farmers could secure goods and food by promising a portion of future harvests as payment. A major problem is apparent in the system. These farmers were often trapped in cycles of debt, unable to save enough capital to purchase their own land to escape it. Landowners controlled the farmers' income, effectively limiting their financial freedom and locking them into a form of dependency that, while no longer slavery, restricted their ability to pursue economic independence. In response to these working conditions, the Southern Farmers Alliance, with around 2 million white farmers, and the Colored Farmers Alliance, with around 1 million members, emerged, each with the goals to improve farmers' economic conditions and gain some form of political power to shape the future of agriculture. Although the alliances were racially segregated, they often met to discuss ways to combat the exploitative practices of the landowners and challenge the crop lien system. By the late 1880s, these alliances sparked the creation of a shared platform, a federally funded sub-treasury plan. This plan proposed that the federal government purchase and store their crops, enabling farmers to wait for higher market prices to sell at a profit. This biracial alliance even became a powerful political force, winning control of state politics in states like North Carolina. During a period where racism was exacerbated by deeply ingrained societal hierarchies, the two alliances leveraged their shared economic struggles to push for fairer prices, improved conditions, and political influence. This alliance was short-lived, however, because in response, the wealthy white planters who were threatened by the potential power shift labeled black farmers as corrupt, urging the poor white farmers to align with them out of racial loyalty. By scapegoating black farmers, they undermined the alliance and redirected focus from economic struggles and toward racial division. Thus, the poor farmers remained isolated and unable to collectively challenge the status quo. In the following years, this divide led to significant disenfranchisement of black people, beginning with Mississippi, a practice that soon spread across the South. By 1901, every southern state had enacted these policies to segregate black people, suppressing the biracial populist movement. Understanding this history shows how populism has evolved from a movement advocating for marginalized voices to one that amplifies majority grievances against minority groups. Trump's populism reflects this century-old shift, repurposing economic hardship as a rallying cry against marginalized communities.
His big kill on the black people is the millions of people that he's allowed to come in through the border. They're taking black jobs now.
His campaign reframed populism not as a fight for the underdog, but as a defense of cultural and racial identity against perceived external threats. Both the white elites in the 1800s and Trump's strategies leveraged the outgrouping of minorities to prevent economically disenfranchised groups from uniting across racial or cultural lines to challenge economic injustices. As a result, the status quo remains protected, with marginalized communities further isolated, economically disadvantaged people divided, and power dynamics left unchallenged. By revisiting these origins, we see how identity-driven populism taps into long-standing resentments and anxieties, highlighting the importance of critically examining the narratives that powerful figures use to mobilize support. I was only 16 when Trump was elected. I didn't understand much about politics, nor did I really care about it, honestly. But one thing I'll never forget is the sheer commotion that his campaign and eventual election in 2016 sparked. It stirred the social and political landscape in ways that felt impossible to ignore, even for someone who wasn't politically engaged nor American. At the time, I was shocked that Trump won, but with a better understanding of politics now, his election, while still disappointing, seems a little less shocking. Now I can see how deeply rooted issues set the stage for Trump's populism and fueled his 2016 and now 2024 victories. To understand Trump's appeal, it's crucial to look at the social and economic climate of America in the years leading up to 2016. For decades, working class Americans, particularly in manufacturing and rural areas, faced wage stagnation, factory closures, and a wave of outsourcing that chipped away at job security. Many felt forgotten by mainstream politicians. This disillusionment was compounded by a polarized media landscape that amplified frustrations and cultural divides. Trump's populism didn't emerge in a vacuum. It arose in response to years of mounting resentment. By tapping into these sentiments, he mobilized a powerful base that felt seen and empowered by his rise. His rhetoric, while divisive, offered a vision for those who felt left behind, a vision no other candidate had matched. At the heart of this unrest were two powerful forces: economic anxieties and issues of identity, both deeply woven into the American experience and critical to understanding Trump's populist appeal. Economic anxiety in the US had reached an all-time high after the 2008 financial crisis, which was the biggest recession since the Great Depression, with 3.8 million Americans losing their homes and the unemployment rate reaching 10%. The crisis was triggered by the collapse of the housing market. And while its technical details aren't the focus here, the public's perception of it is essential. As homes and jobs vanished, many Americans grew disillusioned with financial institutions, and the frustration was compounded when the government bailed out Wall Street. This lifeline to banks, the very entities behind the crisis, angered Americans who felt it rewarded the architects of the collapse while leaving ordinary people to suffer its aftermath. This disillusionment with government and corporate power became fertile ground for Trump's anti-establishment populist message. He positioned himself as the antithesis of the people of power in Washington, claiming that, quote, a global power structure was responsible for robbing the American working class and funneling wealth into the pockets of large corporations. By stoking the flames of distrust, he portrayed himself as the champion of the working class, a voice for those who have felt increasingly overlooked by the political elites. A decade after the financial crisis, the economy has largely recovered and economic anxiety has gradually decreased. A study by Sides and colleagues in 2017 found that the impact of Economic anxiety by itself had a limited impact on voting behavior in the 2016 election. However, when these economic concerns were reframed through the lens of identity and outgroup competition, the combination played a pivotal role in the election. The connection between the two has fueled a heightened sense of cultural threat among largely white Americans. It reframed the narrative of job loss from "I might lose my job" to "people like me are losing jobs to immigrants." This reframing highlights a key element of Trump's appeal: identity politics. His rhetoric provided a clear, immediate target for frustration, rather than attributing these grievances to broader impersonal forces like the government or economy. He serves up immigrants on a silver platter to scapegoat them. In recent years, identity politics has become a powerful force in the American political landscape, as individuals increasingly align their beliefs with aspects of their social identities, including race, religion, gender, and economic status. For many Americans, political engagement is now a means for advocating for recognition, rights, and social justice within a framework that reflects personal and community identities. However, this trend has also contributed to heightened polarization. When our politics are becoming increasingly personal, opposing views are now not just attacks on our political beliefs or ideologies, but direct attacks on us. And, quote, when partisan citizens become angry about politics, they are less influenced by information and less likely to support bipartisan politicians who reach across the aisle to find compromise, ultimately increasing political polarity. Essentially, while identity politics has empowered marginalized voices, it has also complicated the unity of public debate by deepening societal divides. Let's just say it how it is. It's a fact that white males have dominated America for most of its history. Since they have long been the majority and holders of institutional power, white Americans have not historically experienced a strong need for racial identity cohesion in the way marginalized groups have. In fact, I would even argue that it delayed their development of a cohesive white racial identity. However, America's demographic landscape is changing. New census projections indicate that by 2045, the U.S. will become minority white, with an increasingly diverse youth population driven by past and current immigration trends. This shift is significant. Shared hardships and isolation often strengthen group identity, yet for generations, white Americans have benefited from being the majority, with disproportionate access to political, economic, and social resources. Consequently, white Americans have not felt a strong need to rally around group-based grievances, as they don't exist. Studies have shown that historically, resentment toward minority outgroups was a stronger political motivator for white Americans than solidarity within their racial group. But following demographic changes and 8 years with a black president, many white Americans feel their dominance slipping. In 2016, 52% of white Americans reported that life for, quote, people like them was worse than 50 years prior, and 57% felt that discrimination against whites was now as significant as that against minorities. You heard that right. This perception of cultural displacement and rising discrimination have fostered a potent racial consciousness among white Americans. Meanwhile, movements like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate have spotlighted enduring inequalities and inspired waves of activism among BIPOC communities. These movements, often perceived as challenges to white American status, have catalyzed counter-movements like All Lives Matter, reflecting the friction and fragmentation driving today's political divides. In The Guardian, Amy Chow wrote, quote, when groups feel mistreated and disrespected, they close ranks and become more insular, more defensive, more punitive, more us versus them. This statement encapsulates Trump's campaign strategy, which spoke directly to the white working class by framing non-white immigrants as threats to American society. This rhetoric validated any sense of unease white Americans may have had about the nation's shifting cultural dynamics, marked by the growing empowerment of racial minorities and queer communities, among others. Sides and colleagues' 2016 study supports this, finding that white identity was a decisive factor in voting behavior in 2016, particularly for Trump supporters. This has significant implications. One, Trump's election could signify the start of a new era of white identity politics that appeals to perceived grievances among white Americans. And two, it raises questions about the lasting influence of white identity on public opinion beyond Trump. By tying his platform to white identity, Trump contributed to the future of the Republican Party, which may increasingly be viewed as a bastion for white identity politics. As white identity continues to shape voter behavior, this shift could redefine American politics in ways that deepen racial divisions and partisanship. Each person has a social identity, a self-image shaped by belonging to various social groups, whether based on race, religion, occupation, or any category that situates them within society. Social identity theory, introduced by Henry Teifel and John Turner in the 1970s, explores the cognitive processes and social conditions that influence intergroup behaviors. According to the theory, group membership occurs in 3 stages: social categorization, social identification, and social comparison. The best way to explain a theory is to contextualize it within something accessible. With that being said, I think one of the best examples of social identity theory is the 1985 film, The Breakfast Club. The film follows 5 high school students, each from a different social clique, during an all-day detention on the weekend. While the group initially is at odds with each other, they start opening up and bonding. The reason this film is such a strong portrayal of the theory is because we see the effects of intergroup clique dynamics, as well as the stereotypes effect at the individual level. In the first stage, social categorization, people classify others and themselves into groups based on visible or meaningful attributes like race or religion, helping them make sense of the social landscape. By knowing where they and others belong, people can navigate social norms and relationships more effectively. Each character in The Breakfast Club represents a high school stereotype: the jock, the princess, the nerd, the weirdo, and the criminal. These labels shape their behavior, appearance, and social standing. This dynamic is evident in one of the film's opening scenes, where their seating choices subtly reflect their social hierarchy. Claire sits at the front, reflective of her goody two-shoes high status, with Brian the nerd behind her. Andrew enters, notices Claire, and silently agrees with her to sit beside her, signaling their mutual recognition as part of the school's upper social echelon. Bender the criminal quickly disrupts the scene, targeting Brian, who he perceives as vulnerable, and forces him to move his seat. Brian quickly and easily complies with this. And finally, Allison quietly walks to the back, avoiding eye contact while the others snicker and laugh at her. Without a single word, these actions highlight how quickly the characters assess and conform to their social positions, demonstrating the process of social categorization and how it's used to navigate the environment. In the second stage, social identification, individuals begin to align with their groups, adopting shared characteristics, values, and norms. For example, those identifying strongly with Donald Trump's Republican Party may come to view certain values such as nationalism, skepticism toward immigration, and opposition to establishment politics as central to their identity. As members adopt the group's perspectives, their personal self-esteem becomes increasingly tied to the group's status, meaning that any criticism of Trump or his platform can feel like a personal offense. For many of his supporters, group membership fosters a sense of shared purpose, loyalty, and a perceived duty to defend the group's values against opposing viewpoints, like silencing fake news. As the characters grow closer, their vulnerabilities and fears emerge, often shaped by the expectations and identities tied to their cliques. Andrew's sense of self-worth depends on his athletic prowess and success, adopting a win-at-all-cost mindset from his father. Claire feels unable to connect authentically with others and feels constricted and pressured by the school's social hierarchy. Allison's self-concept has been shaped by perpetual social rejection and in turn uses silence as a defense mechanism. This shows how each character has adopted values and features of their social group, deeply embedding them into their personal identity. This scene encapsulates these integrated values. Bender convinces the group to do something nefarious. Claire is scared the teacher will return and see they're gone. Brian is intellectualizing, conducting a benefit-risk analysis of the situation, which annoys Andrew, who threatens to beat him up. All the while, Allison is in the back, staying silent. The final stage, social comparison, involves comparing one's group to others, often to maintain a positive view of your own in-group. This drive for positive distinctiveness can lead to conflict, particularly when a group's status feels threatened. Trump's populism capitalized on this dynamic, fostering a sense of in-group solidarity among white working-class Americans by contrasting their identity with that of marginalized outgroups, ultimately fueling an us versus them narrative. As the characters spend more time together, the process of social comparison becomes central. They begin to compare their own lives, struggles, and pressures to one another's, sparking both empathy and conflict. Obviously, this is a coming-of-age movie, so it showcases social comparison as a tool that allows for mutual understanding, with the end of the film challenging the rigid boundaries of their cliques and making them rethink their understanding of themselves and each other. However, there are scenes that showcase social comparison being used as a tool to feel superior to others. The first scene that comes to mind is near the end of the film when Claire finished putting on lipstick without her hands, an act that maybe highlights Claire's confidence in her attractiveness, only for Bender to immediately try to tear her down. The difference between the characters' upbringings and social groups immediately come into play. He comes from an abusive household who has very little, and in turn views her problems as superficial because her struggles don't align with the hardships he faces daily. To Bender, Claire's problems are trivial, shaped by her privileged background, and he views her confidence as entitlement. This moment is an expression of his frustration with the societal structures that separate them, where he perceives Claire's wealth and social standing as shields from the type of pain and neglect he endures.
I don't even count, right? I could disappear forever and it wouldn't make any difference.
This dynamic serves as an example of social comparison being weaponized to assert superiority. By mocking Claire, Bender temporarily positions himself as morally superior. The scene ultimately illustrates how social comparison can both divide and connect individuals. While Bender's attack stems from bitterness, it also opens the door to deeper discussions about their personal struggles, helping the group slowly dismantle their preconceived notions of one another. One of the core motivations behind group identification, according to social identity theory, is the drive to maintain a positive self-concept. As inherently social beings, humans naturally seek out groups that enhance self-esteem and reinforce a sense of worth. Through alignment with a particular group, individuals gain access to shared achievements, values, and qualities that positively reflect on their self-image. In this way, the group's success or prestige becomes your success or prestige or a personal victory, boosting the individual's self-worth. These positive associations foster a deep loyalty to the in-group, as loyalty is a commonly upheld societal norm. This desire to see oneself, and by extension one's group, in a positive light leads to two main mechanisms of social identity theory: in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. In-group favoritism refers to the tendency for people to prefer, value, and positively evaluate members of their own in-group over those of other groups. Because self-concept is tied to group membership, people feel better about themselves when their group is positively viewed. This often results in preferential treatment toward in-group members and perceiving them as more likable, trustworthy, and competent. In-group favoritism also involves viewing the actions of group members as more favorable or morally justified. On the other hand, outgroup derogation occurs when individuals view members of outgroups as more negative, often as a way to elevate their in-group status and maintain a positive self-concept. This is particularly common when outgroups are seen as threats to the in-group's identity, values, or resources, and can lead to stereotyping, exclusion, discrimination, and blame. Together, in-group favoritism and out-group derogation form a powerful dynamic, where individuals' self-esteem and sense of belonging are deeply tied to a positive view of their own group, and often a negative view of competing groups. These mechanisms are effective because they meet fundamental human psychological needs, protecting self-image, reinforcing a sense of belonging, and simplifying the way we categorize and interpret the social world. These biases are influential forces in shaping political beliefs and interactions, often with detrimental consequences. As people identify more strongly with their social groups, they're more likely to seek out and interpret information that aligns with their positive view of the group, a tendency known as confirmation bias. This bias supports social identity theory by helping people preserve and bolster a favorable view of their in-group. When presented with new information, people tend to prioritize facts and interpretations that align with their group's values and identity, while disregarding or diminishing information that might challenge the group's beliefs or social standing. This selective processing reinforces both in-group favoritism and out-group derogation, as it enables people to see their in-group as consistently right or superior, and out-groups as consistently wrong or inferior. The psychological dynamics extend beyond in-person interactions or traditional media. Today, social media platforms act as powerful amplifiers for these biases, creating environments where people can closely align with their in-groups and easily avoid conflicting perspectives. Through algorithms and echo chambers, social media continuously reinforces group beliefs, making confirmation bias more accessible than ever. In this landscape, group identities become increasingly strong and polarized, leading to significant implications for how we perceive and engage with political content. Many have dubbed the 2024 election as the podcast election, a label that highlights just how much media has transformed political discourse. This shift in media consumption doesn't just change how we get our news, it changes how we identify with our political groups. Social media, particularly through its algorithm-driven feeds, has become a tool that not only informs but also reinforces our social identities and the divides that come with it as well. This election showed how political discourse is increasingly shaped within echo chambers, where algorithms amplify confirmation bias and entrenched political beliefs. Unlike previous election cycles where news coverage was dominated by traditional sources, the 2024 landscape is filled with voices from countless podcasts, TikToks, Twitter threads, and live streams. Algorithms learn users' preferences and feed them content that aligns with their existing beliefs, creating environments where in-group favoritism and confirmation bias can thrive unchallenged. This social media landscape enables people to selectively tune into perspectives that resonate with their social identity while ignoring or downplaying content that challenges it. As the internet and social media are now commonplace in our society, we are constantly bombarded with content. Without the use of algorithms, it would be impossible to find content specific to you. Algorithms are meticulous. They're experts in finding your interests and use that data to quickly curate a feed of videos designed to keep you doom scrolling on the platform. They help users efficiently access the information they're looking for while reducing information overload. While algorithms are certainly necessary in this day and age, it begs the question, how meticulous are they when they're not just finding entertaining content, but actively influencing people's beliefs and politics in negative ways? The answer, very meticulous. The subject of social media algorithms and political polarization is a recently emerging field of study reflective of the socio-political environment in the US. With the rise of interpartisan conflict and political extremism, noted to be becoming polarized at a higher rate than most democracies around the world, it's in part due to the rise of social media and recommendation algorithms. Studies increasingly suggest that algorithms, which are designed to personalize content based on user preferences, unintentionally contribute to echo chambers, where the users are repeatedly exposed to content that reinforces existing beliefs. This narrowing of perspectives can intensify users' political views, creating polarized digital environments that parallel offline political divides. Studies have also found that interacting with one component of an extremist's ideology on social media, like, say, racism, can prompt algorithms to feed you equally extreme content, like misogyny. For example, a study showed that after interacting solely with transphobic content on TikTok, the For You page started to feed the account more transphobic and homophobic content, which makes sense. However, it also started to show discrimination of all sorts, like misogyny, racism, views of white supremacy, anti-vaccine and science, anti-Semitism, ableism, conspiracy theories, and hate symbols. The speed that algorithms feed this content reflects how fast people can be radicalized through social media.
This could also be a reason for the increasing use of social media in political campaigns. These leaders aren't dumb, and they're supported by teams of experts who understand how to leverage algorithms to maximize reach and carefully craft content to mold and mobilize their political bases effectively.
The result has recently been coined a filter bubble, which refers to the state of intellectual isolation that results from personalized searches in social media and the content algorithms feed based on it. In these environments, people may feel validated in their views, but become less exposed to diverse perspectives, which weakens the ability for dialogue and mutual understanding. I recently read C. Nguyen's article called Escape the Echo Chamber, which I believe has important insights into this conversation. To summarize, he differentiates the echo chamber from the epistemic bubble. While both phenomena systematically exclude sources of information, the way they function is different. For starters, the epistemic bubble is, quote, an informational network where relevant voices have been excluded by omission, whereas the echo chamber is, quote, a social structure from which other relevant voices have been actively discredited. So while epistemic bubbles omit contrary views, they don't vilify them. This is a crucial distinction. The omission can be due to cognitive dissonance, where we feel uncomfortable when faced with contrary views to our own, but regardless of the reason for the omission, we can usually pop this bubble by exposing the members to information and arguments they maybe missed or don't understand. However, echo chambers, which I believe reflect the current polarity in American politics, especially for Trump supporters, are far more dangerous. This is because of the systematic undermining that right-wing leaders and followers have toward contrary views. Liberals are not just a different political party, but they're manipulative, not to be trusted, snowflakes, demonic. Any sort of rhetoric is used to vilify and shatter any potential of understanding of liberal politics. Extremist Trump supporters have no interest in leaving their echo chamber, and even when faced with disconfirming evidence toward their views, simply don't care. That's what the most concerning result of the current political climate is, at least in my opinion. We're at a point where some people have been indoctrinated so intensely in extremism that their internal structures of belief are just fried. Regardless of falling for traps in debates or being confronted with disconfirming evidence, it just rolls off them. Their worldviews are so entrenched to the point where opposing views are unable to penetrate their minds like water on wax.
I don't like him. I'll tell you exactly why I don't like him. He's got a big ego. He thinks he's better than God.
Trump said he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it.
No, I don't think so.
This disagreement reinforcement mechanism is, quote, when members can be brought to hold a set of beliefs such that the existence and expression of any contrary beliefs reinforce the original beliefs that they have and the discrediting story. Okay, I'm just editing right now, but we both know that was a little bit confusing, even though that's the actual definition. So essentially, a discrediting story will be told to them in advance, predicting that people outside the echo chamber or outside their in-group will oppose their views. When this happens, members within the echo chamber build even more reason to trust the views within the echo chamber as it was quote-unquote predicted. Not only that, but since the opposing view was discredited, they will continue to not listen to the opposing argument. Trump employs these tactics, like likening Democrats' arguments to
Fake news.
to invalidate it in the eyes of his supporters. I'm not going to open this can of worms more than I have, so I'll end it at the fact that these types of tactics are also features of cult indoctrination. In this divisive climate, the consequences of remaining rigid in algorithmic echo chambers extend far beyond the digital world. When people are continually validated in their beliefs and rarely challenged, the platform for democratic dialogue erodes, leading to greater societal fragmentation and hindering meaningful engagement across political lines.
In sum, there are many contributing factors to Trump's election wins in 2016 and 2024, namely economic anxiety and fears of cultural displacement. Together, they were used by Trump to mobilize the white American working class by outgrouping minority populations and creating an us versus them narrative on multiple fronts, racially, politically, and culturally. This division extended beyond racial lines to encompass partisanship, ideological divides, and marginalized groups, each framed as a threat to the in-group's values and identity. These dynamics were further amplified by social media's ability to reinforce echo chambers, entrenching political divisions like never before. As we reflect on the 2024 election, we must consider not only what these outcomes say about our current political system, but also about the vulnerabilities of human psychology when confronted with messages of division and fear. Moving forward, the role of technology and psychology in shaping political landscapes demands serious scrutiny. How can we safeguard democratic values in a world where algorithms and echo chambers magnify divisions? How do we foster resilience against the manipulation of identity and fear? These are questions that transcend elections, shaping the trajectory of our future.